In a prior video, we looked at the top male stars of every year for WWE in the 21st century. But what about the flip side to that coin? What about the best women from every year since 2000? Well, that's exactly who we're going to be looking at right now, starting with the top female in 2000, Chyna. Yes, come 2000, Chyna had become a rare thing for a woman in the industry back at the turn of the millennium, a true superstar, and one who was breaking down barriers at every turn. After all, with this being the peak of wrestling's mainstream popularity, it was here that she became someone approaching a household name. And the way she did that was by getting to a stage where she wasn't just content wrestling the ladies, no, she was also challenging the men too. Hell, it would be during this year that she reached her high watermark in that division by starting the year as Intercontinental Champion, a belt no other woman has held to this day. And it was also where her on-screen relationship with Eddie Guerrero fully blossomed, with this perhaps being her most famous storyline in all of WWF. But what of 2001? Well, by that point, Joni Laurer would be on her way out of WWF, and that left the door open for her mantle on top to start to be taken up by Lita. Now, if Chyna was someone who stood out on account of her imposing presence and powerhouse style, then Lita did so in a completely different way, by being a complete daredevil. That's right, every time Amy Dumas hit the ring back then, you could count on her to do something absolutely crazy. And that certainly made her a hit with fans, particularly with the alternative crowd of the era. But then Lita was doing this every year she was a wrestler, so what made her so special in 2001? Well, this was the point she fully ascended to being at the level of one of the top stars of her division, with it being her and Trish Stratus' feud against Stacy Keibler and Tori Wilson, which pretty much kept it afloat during the Invasion angle. Come 2002 though, injury would see the Florida native be put on the shelf for a while, and this allowed a new star to rise in the form of Trish Stratus herself. Sure, Trish was already a big deal for the WWE women's division prior to this, as with her buxom appearance, she easily became a hit with young men watching both at home and in attendance. But while she could have easily ridden that train until it ran out of gas, the Toronto native wanted more than this. No, she wanted to be an actual wrestler. And that first started to present itself on screen in full in 2002. Why was that? Well, this was the year that all of Stratus's training behind the scenes began to bear fruit as she started to prove herself in the ring with some great matches. It didn't matter if she was feuding with Jazz, Molly Holly, Victoria, or anyone else. Trish was holding her own and even bettering many of her more experienced opponents in 2002. And that alone makes her the clear choice for the top star the WWE's women's division had back then. Really, this was the point she began making her case in earnest for being the greatest WWE women's star of all time by moving away from being the mere fitness model she'd been seen as before to being a quality in-ring performer too. And that work she was doing here would continue into 2003 as well, which is exactly why she's also our pick for top women's star of that year in WWE. Come on now, by the time 2003 came around, Trish Stratus wasn't just the face of the women's division, she was the high watermark everyone else was chasing after, in that she was amongst the best wrestlers that division had, all while being a clear superstar on a level that no one else outside of maybe Lita could match. And this was evident in her work throughout the calendar year as she took on a cavalcade of opponents such as Victoria and Jazz, all the while defending her women's championship with pride. But it wasn't just about the in-ring with Trish in 2003. No, it was also here that she had one of her more memorable storylines when she and Lita became tied up in an angle with Chris Jericho and Christian, an angle which would eventually see the Canadian turn to the dark side. Of course, that wouldn't happen until 2004 though, and during that year, Stratus would be usurped as the top star in the WWE women's division by our next subject, Victoria. Now, Victoria was never the biggest name in the WWE women's division, even at her peak. But what she arguably was the best pure wrestler. And that was something she proved in 2004, as it was here she fully rose to the top of the pile. How did she do this? Well, after a long time spent playing a psycho heel, this was when she went babyface for the first time. Thankfully then, fans were ready for such a move as they quickly embraced the San Bernardino native and treated her like a true top act. Hell, they were more than happy to see Victoria walk into WrestleMania 20 as women's champion, just as they were more than happy to see her walk out as champion too after she successfully defended against Molly Holly in a hair versus hair match. And they were even happier to see her spend the remainder of the year having some great bouts against the likes of Gail Kim and Trish Stratus. That said, come 2005, the future TNA star's brief moment at the top would be over, as that year the mantle would have returned to Trish Stratus once more. Yes, this was the era where Trish was the dominant force in the WWE Women's division. And 2005 saw her return to the top of the mountain, largely on account of the fact she was by now playing a heel again, something which completely refreshed her gimmick. Honestly, back then there were few people more hated out of the ladies in WWE, and the Canadian played this up to the hills for maximum effect. As to what she was doing bell to bell here, well, aside from continuing on with her career-defining feud with Lita, she'd be holding the women's title as she walked into WrestleMania 21, with her there successfully defending against Divas Search winner Christy Hemme. That's right, even if the Divas era was beginning, Trish had no intention of giving up her throne quite yet, and that would continue into 2006 as well, as she's our choice for top women's star in WWE then too. That said, this year would also mark the end for the Toronto native in many ways, as it would be the point her full-time in-ring career came to a close. But before it did, she made sure to go out with a bang because after turning babyface early on in the year, she had perhaps the best women's program of the entire era when she and Mickie James locked horns in the lead-up to WrestleMania 22. And perhaps knowing she was about to step away already here, Trish would do the right thing by putting Mickie over clean at the Showcase of the Immortals, with this only further solidifying her status as a great who was willing to give back when it counted. What happened after that? Well, after that, Stratus would finish out her retirement tour in her hometown when, at Unforgiven in September, she'd have her last full-time match against her old friend and foe Lita, there defeating her to walk off into the sunset as women's champion again. And because she was gone after that, it meant someone else would have to step up to the plate in 2007 and be the top star of the WWE Women's division, someone who goes by the name of Beth Phoenix. That's right, 2007 marked the start of a new era for women's wrestling in WWE, as with Trish Stratus gone and Lita about to retire herself, we fully shifted into the time of the Divas. But it wouldn't be a diva who was the top star in the division during this 12-month period. Rather, it would be a more traditional women's star in the Glamazon. Yes, Phoenix's job was never to be judged on her looks or take part in a catfight. Instead, she was there to wrestle and to win, and this was something she did throughout 2007 to great effect. Hell, it would be in the autumn that she'd fully put her stamp on the division by becoming WWE Women's Champion, with this in a way establishing her as the Chyna of her time, a powerhouse who no one else could match up to. And that reign of dominance from the Glamazon would only continue into 2008 as well, which is exactly why she's our pick for the top women's star of WWE again this year too. Now, if 2007 was the year Beth Phoenix arrived in WWE, then 2008 was the point she fully established that she was going to be reigning in a dominant fashion, as after starting out things as the incoming women's champion, she'd go on a tear against challengers as wide and varied as Mickie James, Melina, and Maria Kanellis. That said, it wasn't all about the in-ring dominance for the New York native here. No, she was also able to add some more comedy chops to her repertoire in 2008 when she started her odd couple tag team with Santino Marella, the one named Glamourella. Of course, none of this made her any less credible in the ring once the bell rang, however. No, Beth would continue to be a dominating force whenever it came time to lock horns with an opponent. But for as great as she would continue to be as 2009 came around, by that point, someone else would have come along who was just that little bit better, someone by the name of Mickie James. Sure, by 2009, Mickie James had been around for a while already and had long since established herself as one of the top acts in the WWE Women's division. But it was here that she truly rose to the top of the pile for the first time. And the way she did this was by being an absolutely fantastic wrestler during an era where that wasn't really the focus amongst the ladies of WWE. Really, you could make a solid argument that prior to the rise of the Four Horsewomen, Mickie was the best in-ring performer the WWE Women's division had ever seen, and that her peak in this respect came in 2009. After all, it was the point where she was able to win the Divas title from Maurice. And it was also the point she had her controversial feud against McCool, a feud which only turned her into an even bigger babyface by the end. So how could we pick anyone else other than her here? Of course, we can pick someone else for 2010, however, as this year the Divas would fully take over with the rise of Michelle McCool all the way to the top of the mountain. Yes, while it's not the most fondly remembered era of women's wrestling today, 2010 did give us perhaps the peak years of McCool, a mean girl duo which served as the prototype for later duos like the Iconics. And while Layla was certainly a part of what made that pairing so entertaining, the breakout star of the group in many ways, at least this year was Michelle McCool. Why was that? Well, this was the year she unified the Women's and Divas Championships to become the undisputed champ of her division. Obviously then, there's no other pick for the top women in WWE for 2010, as there was no one else here who even approached the future Mrs. Deadman's level of dominance. But what of 2011? Would a new decade fully taking bloom see someone else pick up that mantle? Why, yes it would, and it would be an old name doing so as it happened, because this was the year Beth Phoenix once more became the top female in WWE. What made Beth Phoenix able to rise back to the top of the pile in 2011 as far as the WWE Women's Division was concerned? Well, this was the point she'd reestablish herself as the biggest monster force there when she aligned herself with Natalya to form the Divas of Doom. And with the Hart family member by her side then, the Glamazon was able to rise back up the ranks and eventually win the title again. That's right, it was at Hell in a Cell 2011 that Beth made a clear statement as to her thoughts on her competition when she destroyed Kelly Kelly to win the Divas title. Really, while the women's revolution of WWE was still a few years away yet, you could argue there were some early sprinklings of it first taking root here, as there was nothing about Beth Phoenix back in 2011 which didn't scream serious competitor. Well, would that be enough to see her carry her momentum over into 2012? No, because this year would be all about an all-new superstar in AJ Lee. Now, you don't need us to tell you who AJ Lee is. Come on now, during the early to mid-2010s, the WWE Women's Division pretty much revolved around her and Paige. And it was in 2012 that the New Jersey native first fully arrived in a big way, as it was here that she made an impact not just in the ring, but also in character segments when she was playing a key part in the feud between CM Punk and Daniel Bryan over the WWE title. No, she wouldn't win any gold quite yet, but regardless of that fact, 2012 has to stand as the moment AJ became a superstar, as no other women in the company were getting as much focus as she was here. Honestly, this is another point you can consider an early origin for the women's revolution which was to come, as she was about as far away from the diva figure of the past few years as you could get. And her run of dominance would only continue on into 2013 as well, as she's our pick for top woman in WWE for that year too. Yes, if 2012 was the point AJ Lee broke out as a character, 2013 was where she fully broke out as a wrestler, as this was the point that, with her new stablemates Dolph Ziggler and Big E by her side, she finally won the Divas title in June. And once she had that belt around her waist, there was quite simply no stopping the Union City native, as she would go on a lengthy reign on top, which lasted for the entire year and beyond. Truly, back in 2013, no one in the division could touch AJ, and her work on both the mic and in the ring was reflecting this. Hell, if she wasn't delivering her own version of the pipe bomb on the Total Divas cast in August, she was giving us some truly great wrestling matches against her real-life best friend Caitlyn. So with that said, it should really come as little surprise to learn that as 2014 came around, AJ Lee would still be reigning as the top women's star in all of WWE. Now 2014 would be an interesting year for AJ Lee, because it would be the point where she first found a true challenger to her throne in the form of Paige, someone who up until then had been dominating the scene down in NXT. But while Paige would be the one to finally dethrone AJ and end her at the time record-breaking Divas title reign, that wouldn't be enough to see the Englishwoman take the mantle of the best in the division. No, even if she spent a period of the year chasing the belt rather than holding it, AJ Lee still edged out her rival here, as she remained the best all-round performer overall, partly on account of the fact that she was just a little bit more experienced. But as we all know now, 2014 would mark the end of another era in many ways, because by the time early 2015 came around, Lee would have retired from the ring. And this meant the rise of the women's revolution soon thereafter would see a new lady take her spot as the best in the company, a lady known to fans back then as Sasha Banks. Really, there's a solid case to be made that Sasha Banks is the best in-ring performer the WWE Women's Division has ever seen. And that was something she was proving as far back as 2015 when she was first called up to the main roster. Hell, despite being a heel on Raw, it wasn't uncommon to hear fans chanting for her above her fellow four horsewomen, Charlotte Flair and Bayley. But then there's a reason for that, and this is because during her prior run in NXT, she'd established herself as a true great already, with her matches against Bayley on the developmental brand during the first half of 2015 still being amongst the best women's wrestling has ever seen to this day. Yes, in 2015, there was no better women's wrestler in the world than Sasha Banks. Would that still be the case in 2016, however? Well, no. Because for our money, the boss was pipped to the post this year by a fellow horsewoman in Charlotte Flair. Come on now, by 2016, Charlotte Flair was fully establishing herself as the queen of WWE. And the way she was doing this was by making history over and over again. After all, not only would she walk into the year as what would turn out to be the final Divas champion, but she'd also be the first in a new lineage of women's champions when she brought back that old title at WrestleMania 32 by beating Sasha Banks and Becky Lynch in a triple threat show stealer. As to what the North Carolinian would do from there, well, she'd spend the rest of the year trading that belt back and forth with the boss, with all this culminating in the first ever women's Hell in a Cell match that October. Yes, almost everything Charlotte did in 2016 was setting some kind of new standard. And throughout it all, she'd go undefeated on pay-per-view, with this being a huge storyline heading into 2017, where a new woman would threaten her position as top women's star in WWE. Who are we talking about here? Why, Asuka, of course. Of course, Asuka was already dominating the WWE women's division prior to 2017. She was just doing it down in NXT was all. But after having a record-breaking run as that brand's women's champion and ultimately being forced to vacate it, she'd finally made her way up to the main roster here. And when she did so, she'd continue to be just as dominating as ever, because carrying on from her undefeated streak down on the Black and Gold brand, the Empress of Tomorrow would also remain unbeaten on the Raw brand. Really, if you could use one word to describe Asuka here, it would be invincible, as it truly felt like no one could hold a candle to her in the ring at this point. But after she finally lost in 2018, it would give an opening for someone else to usurp her throne, probably the biggest women's star WWE has ever had, Becky Lynch. That's right, 2018 was the point that Becky Lynch finally broke out of the shadow of her fellow horsewomen when she started developing her character of the Man, an anti-authority anti-hero who served as a PG-era version of Stone Cold Steve Austin. As you would expect then, this got the Irish woman hugely over. But few could have expected just how over she would get, as by the time the year was out, she was probably the biggest star in the entire company, if not the industry, with this being the first time a woman had ever held such an honor. Sure, her peak would come a year later, but 2018 was the point that Becky Lynch fully proved herself to be a star on the level of Roman Reigns, and that alone makes her the only real choice for Best Female in WWE for that calendar year. Hell, there's a reason that when WWE held its first women's-only pay-per-view event entitled Evolution that autumn, it would be the Man who was stealing the show right out from under the headline act, Ronda Rousey. And this was because no one could touch her. So when we move on to 2019 then, there should be no dispute about who the top female star in WWE was that year, as it was once again Becky Lynch. What made 2019 an even more successful year for Becky Lynch than her breakout year of 2018 had been? Well, this was when she went all the way to the top by becoming the focus of the first ever women's main event at WrestleMania. And by the time the dust had settled on that one, she'd be walking away the undisputed women's champion after beating both Charlotte Flair and Ronda Rousey. Sure, we'd never get that return singles bout between the Man and the baddest woman on the planet, but Becky was doing more than enough to be the star of her division throughout the rest of 2019 regardless of this, as she'd hold on to her Raw Women's title for the entire calendar year, defending it against all comers at all times. It didn't matter if it was Lacey Evans, Natalya, or Sasha Banks, they all fell to the Irish woman come the end of things. And that made her quite simply in a league of her own as the 2010s drew to a close. But 2020 would be a very different time, and with this being the point Becky left to go and give birth to her daughter, it would mean someone else would have to rise to the top of the division. Someone by the name of Bayley. Now, there's a solid argument to be made that during 2020, WWE was largely being carried by two people for a significant portion of the year, Bayley and Sasha Banks. After all, it was their partnership turned rivalry which served as possibly the best storyline going that summer. And while Sasha played a huge role in this, we give the edge to the Bay Area native overall, as for the majority of this 12-month period, she was the one holding gold around her waist, not just in the form of the SmackDown Women's title, but also in the form of the Women's Tag Team titles. Of course, her being so great here was helped by the fact that this was the point where heel Bayley felt like it reached its final form, particularly during the excellent Hell in a Cell bout she had with the Boss at the titular pay-per-view in October. But for as great as 2020 was for the role model, 2021 would see her slip down the pecking order a little bit, as her spot of best woman in WWE was taken by a relative rookie in Bianca Belair. Now, in hindsight, it might seem like Bianca Belair was always destined to be a star. But prior to 2021, she was still very much in the process of establishing herself, so nothing was guaranteed yet. That year, though, she would be able to fully put her roots down, with this all peaking with her becoming a part of the second ever women's main event at WrestleMania when she headlined Night 1 that year with Sasha Banks. Of course, there was a reason the EST was put in this position though, and that reason was because, even so early on in her run, she was already proving herself to be among the top talents in the division. Good enough that she was able to defeat the boss on the grandest stage to become SmackDown Women's Champion. Really then, as far as women's wrestling in WWE and during 2021, what this year represented more than anything else was the true arrival of Bianca Belair. And that momentum would only continue on into 2021 as it happened, because she'd also be the top star the division had during this year as well. Yes, while 2022 might have seen the EST still recovering from losing to Becky Lynch in a matter of minutes the summer prior, by the time WrestleMania 28 came around, she'd have avenged this defeat by beating the man on the grandest stage of them all in what was arguably another show-stealing performance. And that wasn't the only reason Bianca was riding high during this calendar year. No, there was also the fact that her subsequent reign as Raw Women's Champion would see her defeat just about every other challenger on the roster. Truly, if you were looking for a point where the Knoxville native ascended to that level of the Four Horsewomen, then this was it, as it was here that she mopped the floor with the competition. That was until 2023 came along, of course, and she found herself being pushed aside for a new top woman in Rhea Ripley. Of course, Rhea Ripley had already been a star in WWE prior to this, both in NXT and on the main roster. But it was in 2023, as WWE was enjoying a new wave of popularity, that she fully ascended to that level of the best of her gender within the halls of WWE. How did the Australian do this? Well, by becoming arguably the key player in the Judgment Day faction, all while letting her ongoing storyline with Dominic Mysterio turn into one of the most talked about in the entire industry. And then there was the title success. Yes, after winning the Royal Rumble in January, Mommy would go on to beat Charlotte Flair at WrestleMania 39 to win the SmackDown Women's title, with her from there carrying this belt proudly as one of the top stars of this new era, male or female. Seriously, by now, she wasn't too far off from that level of a Cody Rhodes or a Roman Reigns, and this would continue on into 2024, as she'd also be the top female of WWE of that year too. Come on now, if 2023 was about Rhea winning the gold, then 2024 was about her making it her own as she racked up successful defenses as if they were going out of fashion, all while she was now playing the role of fully fledged babyface. Sure, she would lose her dom-dom to Liv Morgan at SummerSlam as well as her women's World Heavyweight title, but that only fueled the nightmare to bounce back with vengeance by further becoming the face of her division. But would she remain the face of the division by 2025? Well, arguably yes, even if, for our money, the status of best has now moved on to our next subject, Io Sky. Of course, Io Sky has been one of the best wrestlers in the world, male or female, since as far back as her days in Stardom. But it was in 2025 that she finally reached the level of main event player in her division on the WWE roster, with this being helped by her output in the ring. In fact, we'd be hard-pressed to find a better match this year than her three-way against Rhea Ripley and Bianca Belair at WrestleMania 41 Night 1. Really, the only question left is, will she be able to carry this momentum into 2026 and further establish herself as a great of women's wrestling, just like everyone else we've looked at today?